I would like to welcome the Organization for Latin American Unity to our presentation today. With this presentation, we will hopefully show you why our economic development plan for El Salvador should receive the $1 billion grant. First, I would like to discuss the historical background of our country's economy and society. El Salvador's economy has revolved around both exporting and importing goods, with the imports traditionally outweighing the exports. Their biggest trading partner has been the United States. Like most Latin American countries, the rich have controlled most of the land, which has resulted in them having most of the power. This has led to inferior social and physical infrastructures such as buildings, roads, and school systems. Also, over the years, the government has gone through a major transition from its past dictatorships to its current policy of neoliberalism. Next, I'd like to discuss the country's agriculture and natural resources. The land tenure system has consisted of a mixture of subsistence farming, plantations, and cooperatives. The country has historically relied on only one major cash crop, starting off with indigo and turning to coffee for the past couple hundred years. An important natural resource, water, has not been easily accessible or sanitary throughout the country. Also, El Salvador has relied heavily on importing the valuable natural resource, electricity.
This section will discuss the government and social issues that plague El Salvador. The El Salvadorian government has a lot of problems, but we believe it is most effective if two issues are addressed and fixed. The issues are security and the judicial system. What contributes largely to this issue of security is the enormous inequality and high poverty levels. These conditions have helped gangs such as MS-13 and 18th Street flourish. The judicial system, containing the police force and the courts, is hampered by corruption, lack of funding, etc. Our plan is to front on address the corruption and lack of accountability. We believe this will build a more dependable security force for El Salvadorian citizens.
The education system in El Salvador is mostly public, with a few private schools as well. Children enroll at age 7 with an optional year of preschool. They go on to complete 9 years of primary education with 2 or 3 years of secondary education, which correspond to our system of grade school. The curriculum is decided by the Ministry of Education in El Salvador. When children complete these 11 or 12 years of school, they are presented with a general bachelor's, which is equivalent to a high school diploma. Though this system is funded by the government, families must pay a fee for their children to attend public school. From there, college-level education is available. There are various problems with this system. The quality of education in El Salvador is subpar. There are too few teachers, and a large number of them are unqualified. Also, there are not enough schools in rural areas. There are high rates of truancy due to children staying at home to work and support their families, as many rural areas are below the poverty line. Even worse, urban children drop out of schools to join gangs. On top of all of this, parents cannot afford to send their children to school, both because there is a fee imposed by the government and because it is more profitable in the short term for children to begin working at a young age. To address these issues, we are proposing the following solutions. Using the grant money we would receive, we would hire more qualified teachers, specifically ones that can teach English, as language skills are imperative to compete in a global economy. We would also build more primary and secondary schools in rural areas to make education more available to children. Once schools have been built and staffed, we would use grant money to fund extracurricular activities such as sports and youth groups to foster a sense of community. This would give children an incentive to stay in school and lower levels of truancy. We would also eliminate the fee for children to attend school, making it more affordable for lower-income families.
El Salvador was a nation that was once self-sufficient. However, during the 1960s and 70s, the country turned to industry and a bigger dependence on crop importation. Additionally, the distribution of land among Salvadorans was disproportional and in favor of commercial crops to the elite landowners. Thus, peasants who depended on subsistence cropping suffered from lack of arable land. There was a greater economic deficit due to the import dependence and lack of self-sufficient farming. El Salvador lacks a federal agency to oversee farming and fruit production. In the past, the government has intervened, but they have failed, causing unnecessary government spending. They did this by forming cooperatives with elite landowners and peasant farmers working on these cooperatives. However, this failed to produce crops to sustain the nation, and thus the government had to pay compensation to the elite landowners. We propose an agency similar to the United States Department of Agriculture, entitled as the El Salvador Department of Agriculture, or the ESDA, to address these farming issues so that food production can be maintained and the economy can remain profitable. USDA can build on what the government originally started with land reforms in the 1980s. They can do this by creating a commodity credit corporation known as the CCC that will be in conjunction with the ESDA, like it is here in the United States with the USDA. This will help protect farmers and crop prices by necessary buying, selling, lending, and trading to ensure production and stable prices of food. By having an administration similar to the CCC, the cooperatives set up in the 1980s can provide profit to the landowners, farmers, the country, and allow food to be grown directly here at home. This will allow the import sector dependence to decline and the export sector will thrive.
The quality of living in El Salvador is declining due to some factors such as water, energy sources, and structures. Water is a very important natural resource in El Salvador, and their main source of water is groundwater. There are many cities throughout the country that contain surface and groundwater sources. However, groundwater in the north-central mountains is becoming less plentiful, which indicates that the clean sources of groundwater will not last forever. Although surface water is abundant, the majority of it is contaminated from industrial waste, and even shallow aquifers become contaminated from waste disposal. Even though there are ample water sources, rural communities are still left on their own to construct their own water systems that typically last no longer than 5 years. Waterborne diseases are a huge concern since people are still using contaminated surface water, and these diseases are the main cause of infant mortality. Some proposed solutions to fix these issues is to make industrial and commercial improvements to reduce water use. For example, a sugarcane processing plant that used 10,000 gallons of water per minute introduced a recirculation system to significantly reduce their water withdrawals. Improvements such as this one need to be put into practice in other plants as well. Also, the laws that are already in place for proper effluent treatment needs to be enforced and fines for those who violate the laws. In order to avoid facing the issue of no clean water, a program for large-scale groundwater exploration needs to begin. Water has another important aspect in El Salvador, and that's hydropower. The two most abundant energy sources in the country are hydropower and geothermal energy. There are no reserves of coal, oil, or natural gas, which are all imported. Hydropower provides 400 megawatts of energy, which is about 60% of the country's total energy capacity. There are already 3 reservoirs that collect rain during the rainy season in order to provide hydropower during the dry season. However, the water is getting contaminated from domestic industrial waste and as well as sediment from deforestation, which limits its capacity. Therefore, some changes need to be made. There needs to be implementation of sanitation and waste disposal codes and laws, as well as incentives for planting and preserving trees in order to stop sediment from polluting the reservoirs. Also, more reservoirs need to be created to provide for the growing population and to be utilized in rural areas where water systems are lacking. In order to stop relying on the importation of fuel and oil, the country needs to explore other energy options in place of those resources that are imported, and they need to utilize their advantage of geothermal heating. Other than water systems, other structures such as roads and buildings are in poor conditions. The main roads and the roads within the major cities are in good conditions and have wide shoulders, but the rural area and countryside are difficult to access due to lack of roads and the poor conditions the existing roads are in. Buildings are also poorly constructed and never seem to fully recover from damage done from earthquakes. Homes in rural areas are poorly made and are typically made from scrap parts found nearby or mud bricks. In order to improve the quality of living, there needs to be an expansion of roadways in the countryside and improvement of existing roads. This will give people in the area more opportunity to work in cities and in other areas, since they'll now have access, and will also aid in export of materials. Also, building codes need to be implemented, and those who violate them receive heavy fines. These building codes will allow buildings to withstand most of the effects of the earthquakes. Government funding housing projects need to be created so people in rural areas can apply for safe, reliable housing for their families. These proposed solutions for improving the water sources and sanitation, energy efficiency, and creating reliable structures will greatly improve the quality of life.